What would you do if a neighbor showed up at your door with a clipboard, claiming she had the power to fine you, control your property, and even threaten your home when none of it was real? That's exactly what happened in one quiet neighborhood, when a woman named Diane Mercer moved in. She wasn't on the HOA board. She had no authority at all, but that didn't stop her from acting like the self-appointed ruler of the community. Armed with fake violation notices and a relentless need for control, Diane terrorized families, demanded cash, and turned a peaceful neighborhood into a battleground. Some residents gave in out of fear, others stood their ground. And what happened next would expose just how far one person will go to control others and how a community can fight back. Our neighborhood had always been a place people were proud to call home. Families moved here because it was quiet, safe, and built on trust. The lake at the center of the community was the heart of it all, where kids splashed in the summer. Families gathered for cookouts and neighbors caught up during evening walks. For years, things ran smoothly. We had an HOA, but it was small, with rules that were fair and made sense. The board was made up of volunteers who lived here themselves, and everyone more or less respected one another's space. That peace didn't last forever. It all began when a woman named Diane Mercer stepped into the picture. She was new to the neighborhood, and at first most people didn't think much of her. She kept to herself for a little while, but before long she began making herself known. And not in a good way. Diane had a strong personality, and instead of blending in, she started pushing her own ideas of how things should be run. She spoke as if she had authority, even though nobody had actually given it to her. At first, it was small things. Diane began walking around the neighborhood with a clipboard, stopping at different homes and scribbling down notes. She claimed she was performing routine inspections on behalf of the people found it strange, because we'd never had inspections like that before. One neighbor asked her why she was doing it, and Diane responded sharply, saying the neighborhood had become too relaxed and needed stricter oversight. She insisted she was only enforcing rules that were always there. It didn't take long before homeowners began receiving letters from her. They weren't official letters printed on HOA stationery, nor were they signed by anyone on the board. Instead, they looked like homemade citations, accusing people of violations such as having the wrong shade of paint on a front door, leaving a trash bin visible for too long, or planting flowers she claimed weren't permitted. Diane delivered them with a serious tone, warning that failure to comply would result in fines. Naturally, people were alarmed. Most of us had lived here for years without ever hearing of such strict enforcement. At first, some neighbors assumed Diane had been given new responsibilities by the board. Others questioned her authority, but Diane brushed them off, saying she had direct approval from higher up. The truth was, she didn't. She was running her own show, but she made it sound so official that a few people believed her. The first real clash came when she confronted my neighbor Rachel Carter. Rachel and her husband had lived by the lake for more than a decade. Their home was beautiful, with flowers Rachel tended to herself every spring. One morning, Diane marched up to Rachel's door and handed her a citation claiming that her garden violated HOA landscaping policies. According to Diane, Rachel's flowers were non-compliant and had to be removed. Rachel was shocked. She politely asked to see the policy in writing, but Diane refused, saying she didn't need to show her anything and that Rachel had 2 weeks to fix the issue or face fines. That didn't sit well with Rachel. She wasn't the type to be intimidated, especially not in her own home. Rachel reached out to Owen Parker, a longtime resident and one of the most respected members of the HOA board. Owen was equally confused. He told Rachel there was no such rule and no citations had been authorized. Together they began asking questions, but Diane doubled down. She claimed Owen was out of touch and that she was bringing new standards to the neighborhood. It was around this time that I started noticing Diane's behavior more closely. She would patrol the streets almost daily, stopping to snap photos of people's driveways, fences, or even backyard decks. She spoke with an air of authority, telling people what they had to do to stay in compliance. She even went as far as threatening to escalate matters to the county if residents didn't listen. Her confidence was unsettling because she acted as though she had real power when, in truth, she didn't. Some neighbors, not wanting trouble, actually gave in. They repainted fences, moved garden decorations, and even paid fees Diane demanded. That only emboldened her more. The more she got away with, the more aggressive she became. She started issuing citations left and right, targeting anyone she thought wouldn't push back. Rachel, however, wasn't going to roll over. She stood firm, refusing to pay Diane a single dollar. She also began quietly talking with other neighbors who had similar stories. It turned out Diane was handing out these citations across the neighborhood, each one different, each one arbitrary. One homeowner had been fined for having a shed too close to the property line. Another was told their driveway was too cracked and had to be replaced immediately. None of these supposed violations existed in the official HOA rules. Owen Parker decided to bring the matter up at the next board meeting. That's when things really came to light. During the meeting, several homeowners showed up with citations Diane had given them. Some even had receipts showing they'd paid her cash, assuming it was legitimate. When confronted, Diane insisted she was simply helping the community stay in order. She claimed she had the board's support and that those questioning her were undermining progress. But Owen wasn't convinced. He knew the HOA hadn't authorized any of this. And when the board asked Diane to provide documentation backing up her authority, she failed to produce anything. Instead, she grew defensive and accused others of trying to weaken the HOA. Her words only made people more suspicious. By now, Rachel had started documenting everything. She kept the citations Diane had handed out and spoke with neighbors who had been pressured into paying her. Slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Diane wasn't just bossy, she was exploiting the community, pretending to be an HOA enforcer so she could collect money and control people. The turning point for me came one afternoon when I saw Diane standing outside a neighbor's home yelling about a window violation. The family had young kids and they looked terrified as she waved papers in their face. That was when I realized this wasn't just annoying behavior, it was intimidation, plain and simple. Diane was using fear to push people around, and unless someone stood up to her, she wasn't going to stop. As weeks went by, Diane Mercer's influence spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. At first, she targeted only a few homes, but once she realized some residents were too nervous to question her, she grew bolder. Almost every other day, someone new was complaining about a so-called violation notice they had received from her. The once friendly neighborhood where people gathered for evening walks and barbecues now felt tense and divided. People were afraid to leave there. Trash bins out for even a few hours, worried Diane would come around with her clipboard. Her demands became more outrageous. One family received a citation claiming their American flag was non-compliant because it wasn't on a properly approved pole. Another homeowner was fined $100 because their car tires had left excessive marks on the driveway. To make matters worse, Diane would sometimes show up unannounced, knock loudly on doors, and hand-deliver these notices, acting as though she was serving official papers. Her stern tone and the way she waved her clipboard made her seem convincing to those who didn't know better, but not everyone was fooled. Rachel Carter kept her ground. She knew the HOA had no such rules and refused to be bullied. In fact, Rachel began encouraging her neighbors to stand up too. She told them plainly, "Don't give her a dime. None of this is legal." Some listened, but others admitted they had already paid her out of fear. One elderly couple confessed that they had handed Diane $250 in cash to avoid what they thought would be escalating fines. That revelation shocked Rachel and Owen, proving that Diane wasn't just pretending to enforce rules, she was profiting off her intimidation. Owen Parker, the respected HOA board member, became increasingly concerned. He arranged a special meeting to address the growing problem. Word spread quickly, and on the evening of the meeting, the small clubhouse was packed with frustrated homeowners. One by one, residents shared their stories. Some had stacks of citations, each one different. each one accusing them of bizarre violations that didn't exist in the bylaws. A man stood up holding 3 separate notices Diane had handed him in the span of 2 weeks. One demanded he repaint his shutters, another said his mailbox was too short, and the last one claimed his lawn ornaments were excessive. The board listened carefully. When Diane was asked to explain herself, she didn't back down. Instead, she launched into a speech about how the neighborhood was falling apart, and how she was the only one willing to restore order. She argued that the official board wasn't doing enough and insisted she had the right to take matters into her own hands. Her tone was fiery, and for a moment a few residents clapped, thinking maybe she was just being strict. But then Owen asked her the critical question, "Where are you getting your authority?" The room fell silent. Diane fumbled for words before claiming she had direct approval from the county housing office. Owen, knowing this was nonsense, pressed her for proof. She promised she had paperwork at home, but conveniently hadn't brought it. This excuse didn't sit well with anyone. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Diane had no official backing. Still, she stormed out defiantly, saying people would regret undermining her. After that night, the neighborhood atmosphere changed again. Instead of being afraid, more people began to question her. Neighbors started comparing notes, realizing they had all been targeted in different ways. Rachel took the lead in organizing a small group determined to put an end to Diane's fake authority. They began documenting every interaction, saving copies of her notices, writing down dates and times when she showed up, and even snapping pictures of her walking door to door. The evidence grew quickly. Diane wasn't just issuing random violations. She was collecting money. Several residents admitted they had given her cash, some under the impression it was an official HOA fine. Others said she had pressured them by threatening legal action or telling them their property would be flagged if they didn't comply. It was extortion disguised as neighborhood management. The breaking point came when Diane targeted the Martinez family, who had only recently moved into the neighborhood. They were new to HOA living and unfamiliar with what rules were real and what weren't. Diane showed up one afternoon while Officer Luis Martinez, the father of the family, was on duty with the local police department. His wife answered the door, and Diane handed her a citation claiming their backyard fence was unauthorized construction. The notice demanded an immediate fine of $150. When Officer Martinez came home and heard about it, he immediately knew something was wrong. He asked his wife to show him the paperwork. It was a simple sheet of paper with Diane's handwriting, nothing official about it. He recognized it for what it was, a scam. Unlike many residents who had been too intimidated to fight back, Martinez had the training and authority to take action. The very next day, he attended an HOA meeting and calmly laid out the situation. He warned Diane directly that what she was doing could be considered fraud and harassment. Diane didn't take the warning well. Instead of backing down, she grew even more aggressive. She shouted at Officer Martinez, accusing him of trying to silence her. She claimed he was abusing his badge to protect rule breakers. Her outburst shocked the room, but it also exposed her true colors to anyone still on the fence about her behavior. From that point forward, Diane lost much of the little credibility she had left. Rachel and Owen seized the moment. Together with Officer Martinez, they began compiling all the evidence neighbors had collected. By now, the file was thick with copies of fake citations, written testimonies from residents, and notes on the cash payments Diane had demanded. They knew it was time to take things to the next level. Diane's intimidation had gone too far, and if left unchecked, she would only continue preying on vulnerable neighbors. Meanwhile, Diane seemed to sense the walls closing in, but instead of stopping, she doubled down. She continued patrolling with her clipboard, but now she carried herself with even more hostility. She muttered insults under her breath, accused neighbors of conspiring against her, and even trespassed onto people's lawns to take photos. The once peaceful, family-friendly neighborhood had turned into a battleground. But what Diane didn't realize was that her own actions were digging her deeper into a hole she couldn't escape. The neighborhood was no longer intimidated. It was united. And with Officer Martinez involved, the situation was about to escalate in ways she hadn't prepared for. By the time autumn arrived, the tension in the neighborhood had reached its peak. Diane Mercer's campaign of fake HOI citations and intimidation had gone on for months, and nearly everyone had been targeted in one way or another. Some people were exhausted, some were angry, and others were just fed up with living in fear of her next knock at the door. What had once been a quiet suburban community now felt like a place under siege, and the residents knew it had to end. The turning point came on a chilly Saturday morning. Diane was spotted marching down the street with her ever-present clipboard. She wore a reflective safety vest as though she were conducting some kind of official inspection. Neighbors peeked through their blinds, whispering that she was on the prowl again. This time, however, she wasn't just jotting down notes. She was taking pictures of driveways, fences, and even people's cars. It was intrusive and unsettling. When Diane reached the Carter household, Rachel had already decided she wasn't going to let her get away with it any longer. As Diane raised her phone to take another picture, Rachel stepped outside and confronted her. "Diane, enough is enough," Rachel said firmly. "You don't have any authority here. Stop harassing us." Diane, unfazed, snapped another picture and scribbled something on her clipboard. "You're in violation again, Rachel. That lawn ornament is not approved. You'll be receiving a fine." This time, however, Rachel was ready. She pulled out her own phone and began recording. "Actually, Diane, I'll be the one documenting you. Everyone deserves to see how you've been behaving." The exchange drew the attention of several neighbors who came outside to watch. Diane, realizing she was being filmed, grew furious. She tried to snatch the phone from Rachel's hand, shouting that recording her was illegal. But before she could escalate further, Officer Luis Martinez, who happened to be at home that morning, stepped in. He calmly but firmly told Diane to back away. "You've crossed the line. This is harassment, and it stops today." His presence alone carried enough authority to silence Diane momentarily, but she still muttered angrily about being the only one trying to maintain standards. That moment marked a shift. The neighborhood now had undeniable proof, video evidence of Diane's behavior. Rachel uploaded the clip to the neighborhood's private online forum, where nearly every resident saw for themselves how Diane operated. Comments poured in, most of them expressing outrage and disbelief at how far she had gone. What had once been whispered complaints was now a united outcry. Within days, Owen Parker and the official HOA board filed a formal complaint against Diane with the county housing office. They included the video, stacks of fake citations, and written testimonies from over 15 neighbors who had been harassed. The evidence was overwhelming. The housing office acknowledged the complaint and opened an investigation, but even as the wheels of official action started turning, Diane refused to back down. She doubled her efforts, going door to door with even more bogus notices. Some residents reported that she had become openly hostile, shouting insults and accusing them of being part of a conspiracy against her. One man, Tom Daniels, recalled Diane telling him that he would lose his home if he didn't repaint his garage door within a week. Tom, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years, was stunned by her boldness. Her behavior only further solidified the neighborhood's determination to stop her. More people began recording her visits, and soon there were multiple videos circulating, each showing Diane's aggressive tactics. The more she fought to hold on to her fake authority, the more evidence piled up against her. Finally, the situation came to a head during another HOA meeting. This time, the turnout was larger than ever before. Nearly every household sent at least one representative, and the atmosphere was electric. People were ready for answers, and they wanted resolution. When Diane walked into the room, clipboard in hand, the crowd erupted in murmurs. She stood tall, acting as though nothing was wrong. But Owen, Rachel, and Officer Martinez were waiting. Owen opened the meeting by laying out the facts. The official HO had never authorized Diane to issue citations, collect money, or enforce rules. He reminded everyone that any legitimate HOA action would always come directly from the board, with proper documentation and signatures. Then he played one of the videos showing Diane yelling at a neighbor while brandishing her clipboard. The room grew quiet, and all eyes turned to Diane Dodd when given a chance to speak. Diane launched into her usual tirade about how the community was falling apart, and how she was the only one willing to hold people accountable, but this time no one applauded. Instead, people began shouting back, demanding to know why she had taken their money, why she had trespassed on their property, and why she had lied about her authority. Diane's confidence wavered. She tried to regain control, but the tide had turned. For the first time, she faced open defiance from nearly the entire neighborhood. Owen announced that the official board had submitted all evidence to county officials and that Diane would be facing potential legal consequences if she continued her actions. The announcement drew loud applause. For the residents, it was a moment of relief and empowerment. For Diane, however, it was the beginning of her downfall. She stormed out of the meeting, shouting that the board was corrupt and that the neighbors would regret betraying her. In truth, the only thing the neighbors regretted was not standing up to her sooner. With the official complaint in motion and nearly everyone united against her, Diane's grip on the community was crumbling fast, but she wasn't finished yet. In her mind, she still had one last chance to prove she was in control, a decision. That would lead to her most dramatic confrontation yet. After the heated HOA meeting, the neighborhood felt like it could finally breathe. People believed Diane would retreat, embarrassed and stripped of her false authority. But if there was one thing everyone had underestimated, it was her stubbornness. Diane Mercer wasn't ready to let go. Instead of pulling back, Diane escalated her behavior. Within just 48 hours of the meeting, several residents reported finding envelopes taped to their front doors. Inside were official-looking letters that claimed to be from the HOA, complete with a forged letterhead. The letters demanded immediate payments for supposed violations and threatened foreclosure if homeowners didn't comply. The sloppiness of the letters gave Diane away. Spelling errors, mismatched fonts, and awkward wording made them look unprofessional. But what really raised alarms was the fact that the payment instructions directed homeowners to make checks payable directly to D. Mercer. This was no longer just harassment, it was outright fraud. Rachel Carter, the same woman who had recorded Diane weeks earlier, quickly alerted the HOA board. Within hours, the board had collected multiple copies of the forged letters. They knew Diane had finally crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. The evidence was overwhelming, and Owen Parker made the call to the county sheriff's office. When officers arrived, they were presented with a folder of fraudulent citations, videos of Diane trespassing, and testimonies from over 20 residents. For months, Diane had brushed off warnings, claiming she was untouchable. But when two officers knocked on her door and presented her with a notice of investigation, the color drained from her face, according to neighbors who watched from their yards. Diane tried to argue with the officers, insisting she was only doing her civic duty. She waved her clipboard like a badge of honor, but the officers were unmoved. They calmly explained that impersonating an HOA official, issuing false fines, and attempting to collect money under false pretenses could carry serious legal consequences. It wasn't an arrest. Not yet, but Diane was formally warned to cease all enforcement actions immediately. She was also ordered to attend a county mediation session where her conduct would be reviewed. Most people would have stopped there, but Diane couldn't. Her need for control seemed to override reason. Just days after her warning, she staged what would become her final act of defiance on a late Tuesday evening. Several neighbors spotted Diane walking the streets with a flashlight, clipboard in one hand, camera in the other. She was once again taking photos of homes, crouching in bush, and jotting down notes, but this time, the residents were ready. Instead of confronting her directly, they quietly documented her behavior from a distance. One resident even called the sheriff's office while recording Diane lurking near Rachel Carter's driveway. When deputies arrived, they caught Diane mid-act, standing in Rachel's yard with her flashlight pointed at a flower bed she had previously complained about. This time, she couldn't talk her way out of it. The deputies issued Diane a citation for trespassing, and because she had already been warned, They escorted her to the station for processing. She was released later that night, but the damage to her reputation and her freedom was irreversible. The county mediation session took place just 2 weeks later. Nearly 30 residents attended, eager to share their stories. One by one, they recounted their experiences of harassment, false fines, and intimidation. Videos and documents were presented, painting a clear and undeniable picture. Faced with such overwhelming evidence, Diane finally broke her silence. She claimed she had only been trying to uphold standards and protect property values. She argued that the HOA board had failed the neighborhood and that she had stepped in to fill the gap, but the mediator wasn't swayed. In the end, Diane was formally barred from any involvement in HOA affairs. She was fined $5,000 for fraudulent activities and trespassing, and ordered to reimburse homeowners who had mistakenly paid her bogus fines while the penalties weren't criminal charges. They were enough to strip away any illusion of authority she had clung to. The county made it clear any future infractions could lead to harsher punishment, including possible jail time. With Diane officially removed from power, life in the neighborhood slowly began returning to normal. For the first time in months, residents could decorate their homes without fear of a citation. Families hosted barbecues, kids rode their bikes freely, and neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles instead of anxious glances. Rachel Carter, who had been one of Diane's main targets, later admitted she had considered moving away during the height of the chaos. But after the ordeal, she felt more connected to her community than ever before. "We went through this together," she said. "And in the end, we came out stronger." Owen Parker and the HOA board also made changes. They implemented clearer communication policies, ensuring residents knew exactly what rules existed and how they were enforced. They also launched a community newsletter to rebuild trust and transparency. As for Diane, her presence in the neighborhood became a shadow of what it once was. She still lived in her home, but her days of striding confidently with the clipboard were over. Neighbors reported seeing her less often, and when she did appear outside, she avoided eye contact. Her reputation had been shattered, and the authority she once claimed was gone forever. Some felt pity for her, while others believed she had gotten exactly what she deserved. Either way, the community had moved on, stronger and more united than before. Looking back, the residents saw Diane's reign as both a nightmare and a turning point. It exposed vulnerabilities in their community, but also showed the strength that could come from unity. They realized that silence in the face of bullying only gives power to the bully, and that standing together could reclaim peace. In the end, Diane's downfall wasn't just about rules or fines. It was about trust, respect, and the importance of community. She had tried to control through fear, but the neighborhood proved that solidarity was far stronger than intimidation, and so the story of Diane Mercer became a cautionary tale. For some, it was a reminder that not every self-proclaimed authority figure has real power. For others, it was simply proof that, in the end, the truth always wins. Months passed, and the neighborhood began to settle into a new normal. For the first time in a long while, people felt comfortable stepping outside without the fear of being photographed or fined for something as small as leaving a trash bin out too long. Children laughed again as they played in driveways, couples took evening walks, and families decorated their lawns for holidays without worrying about Diane's clipboard appearing out of the dark. The relief was noticeable. Neighbors spoke more freely, and the sense of unity that had formed during the conflict didn't fade away. Instead, it became a foundation for stronger connections. What Diane had intended as control ended up sparking a greater sense of solidarity. The HOA board, led by Owen Parker, took the entire ordeal as a wake-up call. They admitted that, in the past, communication had been unclear, and this lack of transparency left room for someone like Diane to step in and exploit the situation. From then on, every homeowner received clear documentation of rules and policies. Quarterly meetings were scheduled where residents could voice concerns openly without fear of being ignored. The board also created a dedicated email address where complaints or questions could be submitted and tracked for accountability. By Putting these measures in place, the made sure no single resident could hijack the system again. It became less about power and more about cooperation, exactly how it should have been all along. In the months after Diane's fall, many homeowners who had been silent during her reign finally opened up. One man admitted that Diane's constant letters had caused him sleepless nights. He had seriously considered selling his home to escape the pressure, even though he loved the neighborhood. Another woman confessed she had paid one of Diane's fake fines out of fear of losing her house, something she deeply regretted but felt relieved to finally share. Rachel Carter, who had played a major role in documenting Diane's behavior, became something of a local hero. Neighbors thanked her for standing firm when others were too afraid. She often reminded them that it wasn't just her, it was the entire neighborhood working together that had made the difference. These conversations helped heal old wounds and brought the community closer than ever. People realized they weren't alone, and that even the most intimidating bully could be stopped when everyone stood side by side. As for Diane, her presence dwindled to almost nothing. She remained in her house, but her days of walking the streets with authority were long gone. Occasionally, she would be seen mowing her lawn or collecting her mail, but she rarely engaged with neighbors. The same people she once barked orders at now passed by without more than a polite nod. Some said she seemed lonely, perhaps even regretful, though others doubted she would ever admit to being wrong. Over time, she became less a threat and more of a reminder of how quickly things could spiral if people allowed fear to silence them. The neighborhood didn't just return to normal, it became better. Summer barbecues were hosted on a rotating basis, bringing families together. A holiday decoration contest was launched, something that would have been unthinkable during Diane's reign. Even small gestures like helping an elderly neighbor with yard work became more common. What Diane had unintentionally created was a stronger bond between residents. In fighting against her misuse of authority, they had discovered how powerful their unity could be. Looking back, many residents realized that this wasn't just a story about a controlling neighbor. It was about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of community resilience. Diane's behavior showed how far some people will go when they crave control. She wasn't an HOA president, but she convinced herself and tried to convince others that she had the right to dictate everyone's lives. What could have been dismissed as one person's quirks turned into months of stress because people were too afraid to stand up to her at first. But the story also showed the opposite, that when people refuse to be divided and instead support each other, they can stop even the most determined bully. To this day, new homeowners who move into the neighborhood hear about Diane Mercer. Her story has become a kind of cautionary tale, a reminder that authority in a community should always be fair, transparent, and accountable. It also reminds people to speak up when something feels wrong, no matter how intimidating the situation may seem. As Owen Parker once put it during a community meeting, Diane thought she could run this place with fear. But fear only lasts until people decide they've had enough. What lasts forever is trust, and trust is what we're building now. Diane Mercer's attempt to rule her neighborhood with intimidation ended in failure. Her clipboard, her fake fines, and her endless patrols are now nothing more than stories told with a shake of the head or a laugh. What remains, however, is the strength of the community that stood against her. They turned frustration into action, isolation into unity, and fear into courage. And in doing so, they ensured their neighborhood would never again be ruled by someone who mistook control for leadership. In the end, Diane's downfall wasn't just the end of a nightmare, it was the start of something better.